A guardsman stood in front of Buckingham Palace. His red uniform and black bear headdress did not move from people's gaze. Tourists took photos, but he remained static, like a stone sculpture. Suddenly the crowd parted, and a man appeared. His gaze was hostile and his movements were aggressive. "What, are you a coward? Can't you even speak?" His voice cut through the silence. The guardsman did not move. The man took another step forward, raising his hand at the old veteran standing next to him. And it was then that the silence was broken. Tourists near Buckingham Palace, as always, were enthusiastically filming everything they saw: luxury, tradition, grandeur. The guardsman stood at his post, tall and motionless, like a statue. His gaze was directed forward, at the palace, and everyone else was just a part of his world. The silence around him was almost sacred, and although people watched, only rare daredevils tried to break his peace. But today something was wrong. A voice suddenly stood out from the noise of conversations and clicking cameras, cutting through the air. A man, of average height, with an expression that inspired fear, pushed himself out of the crowd. He was clearly not a tourist. Black, worn-out boots, a t-shirt that barely covered his belly, and a brown leather jacket that gave him the appearance of a man ready for a fight. "Oh, look at this one." His laugh was mocking, with a hint of derision. "What, you feel important? Okay, I see you're not allowed to speak, but I don't care." All eyes turned to him. Tourists were watching cautiously, and several people left the circle, afraid of the threat. But this guy, didn't stop. "What, are you going to stand there like a doll and not react to me? You're not a hero, you're just a great piece of photography." He took a few steps forward, approaching the guardsman, and added ominously, "You are worthless." The guard remained impassive. His body was the same as it had been a second ago. He didn't move, didn't say a word. It was no longer just an unbroken silence. His calmness was a real challenge. The man, unable to resist, came even closer and raised his hand to the old veteran standing next to him. He did not even realize that these actions could have consequences. The guardsman broke his silent stance without moving. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. This was not just a response to a physical threat. This was the moment when unquestioning discipline began to radiate real power. Now no sound could distract him from this moment, and nothing that had come before mattered anymore. The street in front of Buckingham Palace was crowded. Tourists from all over the world filled the square, and they had their phones in their hands, ready to capture every moment that reminded them of the greatness of this culture that is inextricably linked to the monarchy. And among them stood he, the royal guard. His red uniform and black bear hat contrasted with the gray landscape around him. He stood there as if he were part of this majestic tradition, unshakable, unwavering. But today, everything changed. A middle-aged man, with a rough look and expression that did not bode well, slowly approached the guardsman. His steps were stubborn, and his gaze was filled with contempt. He seemed to know exactly what he was saying would have an effect. He was experienced in provoking. He could feel how the atmosphere vibrates at the moment of conflict, and he liked it. "Yes, of course, you are standing here like a statue. All these tourists are looking at you, and you can't even open your mouth? What? They don't let you?" His words fell like stones at the one who seemed to be his biggest target, the guardsman. The tourists standing nearby began to talk. Some, looking nervously at each other, whispered quietly among themselves, while others, a little more courageous, began to record everything on their phones, hoping for another sensational moment for their social networks. And now, this moment became more than real. But the guard did not react. His gaze was forward, and his silence became even more expressive. He was calm, unwavering, and this seemed to irritate the man in front of him even more. The crowd around him relaxed a bit, and more people began to watch closely. Only a few desperate tourists dropped their cameras, preparing for the situation to get out of hand. But the majority remained standing, not knowing what to do. They were just witnesses, nothing more. A man took a step forward, and then another, and suddenly threw his arm out, almost hitting an old veteran standing next to him. He did nothing but stagger a little in surprise, but it was enough to change the course of events. The guardsman reacted silently, and most importantly, unmoving. His gaze, which had previously been merely neutral, became much sharper. It was an instantaneous change that seemed to break the silence. The man who had previously challenged himself to action realized that he no longer had the upper hand. The real power was in front of him. "Get your hands off him," the guard said, and although his voice was calm, he was so sure of his words that even the crowd was quiet for a moment. There was something in the guardsman's eyes that was not seen in ordinary people. It was determination that created an atmosphere around him in which any attempt at provocation would have looked ridiculous. The crowd, which had been standing at a distance, felt how the situation could quickly become dangerous. And it was evident even through their calm expressions. Some of them stepped back, as if they felt that the threat had become a reality, not just a verbal skirmish. And the man who had initially seemed confident in his abilities began to doubt himself a bit. Instead of attacking again with his words, he became a little nervous, started moving nervously, and his hand gestures became more aggressive. He took another step forward and sharply hit the guard on the shoulder. But the guard remained unmoved. His gaze did not change, his hands remained in the same static position, and his body did not even flinch from the blow. It was not just a show of discipline. It was a sign that he was not just standing there, he was guarding peace and order. And no provocateur could shake that. The man who was waiting for a reaction to draw emotions out of the guard did not get what he hoped for. His aggression remained unanswered. So he turned around, gaining energy for a new round, and tried to throw another provocative look. But the guard did not respond. He stood at his post, and only his inner strength became more visible to everyone who saw how quickly the situation was changing around him. It seemed that everyone around him had stopped. The crowd stood in tense silence, realizing that the situation could get out of hand at any moment. People began whispering again, their eyes darting between the guardsman and the man who was losing his temper. And the man, he couldn't understand it. The idea that the guardsman did not move, did not respond to any of his actions, his words and provocations was a real insult to him. He was used to everyone around him reacting, everyone changing under his pressure. All his aggression was just a way to gain control, to make others obey. But here, in front of him, was a man who did not allow this to happen. He didn't make a single move, as if he were outside of the struggle. But this did not calm him down. The man took a few steps back, his face covered with anger, and he shouted loudly, "Do you think you are immune here? You're just a man in a suit. What can you do? Look at you, standing here like a soulless doll pretending to have respect." The crowd involuntarily gasped, and several tourists pulled out their phones. Everyone knew this could end badly. But what was even more disturbing was that most did not dare to intervene. Only a few people were whispering quietly among themselves, trying to think whether to intervene or whether it was better to leave it to the guardsman. The man obviously had no intention of stopping. He came even closer to the guard, and now his voice sounded sharp. "What? You're not going to say anything? Are you a fighter, or just a weakling standing here because of some old tradition? Stay with your statue, you can't even defend yourself." The guardsman did not flinch. His attention was fully focused on this man, but he showed neither anxiety nor anger. His shoulders were relaxed, and the movements he made seemed to indicate that even now, in this tense moment, he seemed to remain completely calm. His stance was completely unmistakable, and his heart was beating without haste. But everything changed when the man approached again, this time with a strong, defiant step. He raised his hand and forcefully pushed the guardsman on the shoulder. And it was not just a word. It was a physical act of violence. The guardsman did not move. He did not even look back. At the moment when the crowd held its breath again, the man decided to go even further. The tourists who remained on the spot were excited, but even more shocked was the silence that struck the crowd. Everything stood still. You could even hear the cautious steps that people were taking backwards. Each of those standing next to the guardsman felt that the situation was about to go the other way. The man raised his hand and hit the guardsman's cap. This was unacceptable. He broke one of the biggest taboos, touching and disrupting the appearance of a guard. The crowd began to hold their breath, and a feeling of unease spread through everyone. None of those present could have imagined that this would lead to what would happen next. But then the guardsman, who had been watching all this with an impassive face, suddenly broke his unshakable discipline. His hand, like a hammer, came up and caught the man by the wrist before he could disturb the peace once again. Squeezing his finger, the guard simply stopped his movements. Now the man could not even move. "Don't touch my hat," the guard said quietly and clearly, his voice now sounding noticeably deeper and firmer than ever before. The tourists standing nearby immediately fell silent, unable to believe their eyes. It was a moment that immediately changed the mood of the crowd. People began to quietly discuss what had happened. "It's incredible," they whispered. "He didn't move, didn't say a word, but now everything has changed." The crowd had changed its perspective. No longer were they just witnessing. Now everyone realized that they were facing a real power that would not allow anyone to be bullied anymore. And this moment became a landmark. The man who had been the center of attention just a few minutes earlier began to feel helpless. He no longer had control. His face showed panic. The man who had such an aggressive advantage just a few minutes ago now felt his confidence melting away. The guard was not giving him a chance. All his determination and calmness left no room for provocation. It seemed that this moment could last forever, and all the man had to do was fight his own fears, which he still did not understand. He tried to pull his arm out, but the guardsman's hand held him like an iron chain. He tried to break free, but felt the grip on his wrist tighten even more. The man's strength was broken not only by the guard's physical presence, but also by his cold gaze, which left him with no hope. "I said, leave him alone." The guard repeated his words again, but with such pressure that his voice sounded like an order, not just a warning. The man who had been shouting and expressing his disdain suddenly fell silent. He could not move, and even though his face was red with rage, he could no longer argue. The crowd began to gather around him more and more, almost hushing their voices, and several people took out their phones to capture the moment when the guard finally did what should have happened long ago. Everyone realized that there was no more room for threat or aggression. This was the point of no return. The man turned his head, his gaze became nervous, and his jaw clenched with powerlessness. He tried to break free again, but the forces were no longer on his side. He was so stubborn that even now he was not ready to give up. His gaze was angry, but at the same time full of disappointment, because he realized that there was no way back. "You don't understand. You have no right." His voice was weak, as if he was trying to convince himself that it could still be changed. He tried to speak again, but the guard wouldn't let him even breathe in his own way. The tourists continued to watch, and the first voices of approval began to appear among them. Everything the guard was doing seemed unbreakable, and his calmness unshakable. Several men, standing next to the women and children, began to quietly discuss what it really looked like. "He hasn't changed. From start to finish, he was just flawless," one of them said. A veteran standing nearby, watching the scene, suddenly realized that everything that was happening now had another meaning. He was not a part of this confrontation, but he saw the ideals that support the British monarchy come to life through this moment. He involuntarily came closer. "Hey, leave him alone," he said, his voice calm but firm. He felt these words restoring order, even though he hadn't expected it. His words sounded like an authoritative end to the dialogue. The guardsman did not answer. He did not look up at the veteran, did not pay attention to what he was doing. His attention was focused only on the one man in front of him, and this allowed him to remain as he was, unmoved, cold, and disciplined. The veteran, seeing this picture, tilted his head slightly. He realized that the guard was doing more than just protecting his territory. He was standing there for something more, to defend his honor, and to remind everyone watching once again that true strength lies in calmness, in the ability to remain steadfast even when provocations are tearing the air around you. The man who was still trying to break free took a deep breath. His strength was melting away, and his words no longer had any effect. He began to feel his legs weakening, and eventually his stubbornness began to give way. A few seconds of silence followed, and suddenly the man gave up. He dropped his shoulders, calmed down, and no longer tried to struggle. "Take me away from here," he muttered quietly, his voice sounding like a powerless plea. The guard only then let go of his wrists, not reacting to anything. Everything he had done was just the fulfillment of duty, and now he could calmly return to his position. The veteran who had been watching all this stepped back a few steps, breathing in the air that seemed much cleaner after what had happened. The situation, which had recently seemed so tense, was now becoming more and more calm. The tourists, who had been filled with nervous excitement just a few minutes ago, now stood with understanding. They saw how the guard, without wasting a word or action, stopped the situation before it got out of hand. The man who caused the conflict was powerless. His face, which had recently been marked by arrogant aggression, was now grim and reflected utter frustration. A few minutes ago, he was confident that he could outsmart the guard and force him to react, but the reality was harsher than his brutal attempts. The guard did not break, did not issue any warnings, he simply did what he had to do, and that was it. "I warned you," the guard said quietly, turning his head toward the man, who was now under the control of the palace guards. They quickly picked him up and began to lead him toward the exit from the square, leaving the crowd whispering among themselves. "He's no longer a threat," was the last look the guard gave the man before returning to his post. The veteran approached the guard and, feeling the gravity of the moment, nodded in gratitude. No more words were needed. because what had just happened required only one thing: respect. The guard standing before him was a true embodiment of professionalism and self-discipline. "Thank you," the veteran whispered as his eyes met the guard's. Their silence held all the power of the world. Meanwhile, the crowd began to disperse, feeling that the situation had been resolved, but perceiving the same scene differently. People started exchanging opinions, and a few people even started applauding. Not just for the dignity of the guardsman, but for his ability to control the situation with such impressive restraint. Everyone will remember this. Not a single movement, not a single emotion, but only the calm that filled the square. The veteran standing next to him continued to watch the guardsman. He was already older, had years of service and battles behind him. But what he had just seen was something more than just a routine patrol. It was a moment of pure power that did not require external demonstrations. He looked at the guard, and something new appeared in his eyes, not just gratitude, but recognition of true heroism. The veteran quietly approached him again. "I don't know if you realize it, but you just saved not only the situation, but our entire honor," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. The guardsman did not answer, only nodded slightly. His gaze was again directed into the distance, toward the palace, as always. And although he remained in the same calmness that had been in him from the beginning, it was clear that today he had done more than just stand guard. He had done something that is important to all of us. He had prevented injustice from prevailing in the world, even on such a small level as these few minutes in central London. The palace that stood majestically behind him remained as it always had, a symbol of history, a symbol of strength. But today, perhaps, this place has become another testament to the fact that true strength lies in calm and discipline. And although no one else asked whether it was possible to withstand this, everyone who witnessed this scene knew that the guardsmen had both strength and nobility. And this is the best demonstration that a true hero never looks like a person with burning emotions. He stands where he belongs and does his job without making any noise. And yes, this time he remained calm, just like always.